Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for joining us. Today I'm talking to my colleague at Digital Science, Leslie McIntosh. And so firstly, I'm going to let her introduce herself. So Leslie, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. I am Leslie McIntosh, as Simon said, with a background in public health, epidemiology, and biostatistics by education. And then I ran the Center for Biomedical Informatics at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. So my background comes from public health, moves in a little bit to medicine, but I worked in big data for quite a while, and that's what led me into where I am now.
Okay, so now you're CEO and co-founder of Ripeta. So how did you come to set up your own company?
That's because I was naive. I don't know. So, no, because when I was working at the Center for Biomedical Informatics, I started noticing that we had a lot of very fine researchers there who had a lot on their plate. And it would be very important to have both the work that we did in our center cited, so all of the medical data, which was aggregated and used for their research, needed to be cited. It also needed to be easy for them. And the other thing is, this was at a time when reproducible research became part of it was named a crisis, but we became more aware of the issues with reproducibility and the lack thereof, with the change that internet, the computer, just bigger data had to do. And so I looked for a solution. Actually, after one of my medical students said to me, she goes, "Well, I'd cite you if you made it easier." And I was a little bit upset with her at the time. And then I went, she's right. She's very busy. Here she is trying to do all of this in research. And so then I formed Ripeta.
Yeah. So as someone who's observed scientific communications from both sides, both as a researcher and from your role at Ripeta, what do you see as the main challenges in 2023?
Well, I think there's some challenges that were there regardless. And that is, when I was a researcher, I did not understand the relationships that certain people have with the publishers, with the editors, and certain researchers, and not everyone does. And so I didn't understand the desire to publish good work. And a lot of publishers really want that. I think societies play a very important role in that. On the other side of working with publishers in the publishing industry, I see their perspective in trying to work with researchers. So there's this disconnect that has been there. And I know that at least from the publisher side, they're working on that. I just think that there could be, and this is the theme that comes out, is there needs to be more communication across sectors, not just between publishers and researchers, but also with government and funders, with corporate America, who also publishes or uses these publications. So I think that's one of the key issues that we need to be looking at for the upcoming year.
Yeah. With those challenges in mind, there's a new product out called Dimensions Research Integrity. So how do you think that is going to help meet those challenges?
One of the challenges that we have right now is peer review is, I think, stretched to the limit. And that's a very important method for trust within our publications. And things like Dimensions Research Integrity can automate certain things of trust markers within science. So within scientific publications, let me be very specific. So looking for things automatically, such as looking at the author and verifying that the author exists, looking at the funding statement, pulling out an analysis section of the paper. So different sections is very important. Looking to see if there should be an ethics statement. Those things can be automated. And that's where Dimensions Research Integrity allows those checks to happen before a paper is published or in aggregate after papers are published, to really understand how things are moving or will move, or prevent them from going and giving the authors a chance to correct things that they might have just omitted, such as an ethics statement when they needed to have one, which happens, but gives you an opportunity to improve before it gets to the editor. So that's just an example of how it could help.
Yeah. And it seems to me that there's an underlying assumption really that this is really important, that we're able to monitor and track research integrity. And that's something that perhaps everyone, all the different stakeholders need to take ownership of. Is that something you'd agree with?
I would strongly agree with that. And as you know, I think that research integrity is the issue of this decade. I think we're going to see it for a number of reasons. If I can go ahead and go on this little tangent for just a moment, what we have is the movement towards open science. Science is going to be open. We have that with the Nelson memo from OSTP, which we can talk about a little bit later. But I think if we take a step back and look at a parallel in time, we might see what we need. So I just finished a book called The Library Book by Susan Orlean, and talking about the opening of the LA library. And there was a fire there in 1986. Fascinating book. The reason that I bring this up is because she goes into the history of the building of the library. And once it finally opened, they ended up having people come and steal some books. They cut out pictures of books to make flyers. So there were some nefarious things going on within the greater context that the community loved this library. This was a library built during the Great Depression. People wanted this community service. So this was a great thing. And I think there's a lot of parallels with open science that we're seeing as well. There's a lot of great things about opening up our science, opening up our data. And there are some checks that we need to have in place. There's a reason that you have to have a library card and you have to go in to check out the library. And there's small fines, but there are fines if you don't bring the library book back. There are some checks that way, and there need to be those checks with open science for us to work as a public good and to make science better. And that's where I think research integrity and these trust marker checks are very important as we move forward.
So we both worked on a story in 2022 that was reported and published in Retraction Watch, where several articles will be retracted as a result. And I guess you reading something on Twitter started it, but you were able to identify and use kind of checks to identify where the problems were happening using both Dimensions and Ripeta. So can you take us through how you use both of those tools to identify the problems with the articles?
Yeah. So first of all, as you mentioned, there was a tweet at that time about someone who was very frustrated, who wanted a plagiarized version of their paper retracted. So I thought, oh, I will take these papers, both the one, and it wasn't hard to find the one that was plagiarized, and I want to run it through Ripeta and see the Ripeta checks at the time, which are now Dimensions Research Integrity, but these trust markers, and see if anything's flagged, just out of curiosity. And in running through, something was flagged, which was on the plagiarized. We didn't know it was plagiarized at the time, by the way. What ended up happening was the funder was not real. And that was a check that we look at, is a funding statement, and we look for the funder. So that's where Ripeta at the time really helped with that. Where Dimensions came into play is I started wanting to know, well, is this an isolated event, or is this author doing this? There were multiple authors, but it was clear that one author had the same funder on many papers, and I wanted to see if there was a pattern. And sure enough, Dimensions allowed that to much more easily be seen, because they have this corpus of millions of papers. They have disambiguated the authors within Dimensions to help look for those authors. So I was leveraging both these trust markers and the power of a networked database of dimensions that we could use.
Okay, so it seems like we've already got some tools that will help us with research integrity, and we've got some new tools now with Dimensions Research Integrity. But do you think we've got the right other tools, and perhaps just as importantly, the right policies in place to help us ensure that research integrity is established, is protected?
I think we do for now. They need to be implemented. We have a lot of tools to do checks, but they're not implemented within a streamlined process within our workflows. We're still, as a scientific community, we're still working on old paradigms, which moves much more slowly than the reality and the speed at which we communicate in this day and age. So that needs to be sped up. And I think that can be done through automated tools. The policies are coming around. Policies always lag or tend to lag a little bit from where technology is. I think those are coming around. The thing is there's always going to be something else. And I think about this in the way that art fraud happens, is that once you increase the checks for something, then the sophistication of a fraud has to happen again. So that's on the nefarious side. But let me just go back on that one. So basically, if people had put on any old frames with artwork in a forgery, then they figured out that they had to go back and get old frames and put those on their forgeries. So that it just comes, one after another. And that happens with what's going on in science too. We learn a little bit, we put in a few safety guardrails around to scaffold to support research integrity and as a pillar of science. So we have that, but we're going to have to continue to stay abreast of things. We do need to improve areas such as communication and who's responsible for what. The researcher can't be responsible for everything. And yet the institutions, if they work at an institution, what is their responsibility? That needs to be defined and codified. Where to go? There's COPE, the Center on, Simon, why am I blanking on it? Publication
Committee
Ethics.
on Publication Ethics.
Thank you, Committee on Publication Ethics. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they're a bit overwhelmed with how much is coming their way, the torrent of information coming their way. And governments, of course, are working towards more policies. Is it enough? It has to be enough for now. But I honestly think the biggest thing that we need to work on now is this awareness of the importance of research integrity and holding strong to what science has to offer and the facts that we have to offer and the truths that we have to offer in the scientific community.
Mm-hmm. So thinking about, policies, the big policies you mentioned before was the Nelson memo or the OSTP memo that came out in August last year. So specifically with regard to research integrity and perhaps more broadly, how do you think that is going to play as that unfolds and that starts to be implemented?
Yeah. So great question. I am not even going to guess how that's going to unfold from the different policymakers, from the different institutions that are going to be affected by the policies and what they need to do. What I want to focus on is what does that mean by opening science and opening data? And because with this requirement, there is going to be more of that. And with that is now bridging the information coming out of ivory towers and typically have been behind paywalls of publications to a public view, which can be very good with the right support underneath it, with the right filters. You can't just put everything out there and expect that people without the knowledge inherent in the study, inherent in the science with the background will understand and will interpret the information in the same way. Now, that's not always a bad thing, but it can be misused, and we shouldn't be naive to think that it won't be misused. So we need that bridge and that communication between the scientific world and the non-scientific world for that bridge of understanding. That's where this information moves to public policy, that moves to understanding, and it moves to the trust in science. So we need science journalists who can help translate those of us who are not very good at speaking with more simple words. And I say more simple, I should say more clearly, right? Because that's what we're looking for, is clarity, and it's that clear as academicians.
Yeah. Well, hopefully things do unfold for the better. And I look forward to listening and hearing a lot more about Dimensions Research Integrity in 2023. So for now, thank you very much for your time, Leslie.
Thanks for having me.